everyone! This video is due to go live on Halloween night, and so I thought I would make a break from my usual Halloween tradition of posting my weird phobias. Not because I don't still have some weird phobias I've not talked about, but because, you know, I make myself look weird often enough on this channel. So instead I thought I would share with you some mysteries. Now, I am a sucker for a good mystery, so I have been online and found two that really made me go, eh? And I have also decided to share a true story from my life, which is a bit of a mystery and has a potentially spooky aspect to it, so it's perfect for Halloween night. So if you want to know what my spooky mystery is, you're going to need to watch to the end, because first I'm going to share with you two true stories that I found online. Let's get into the first one. This tale dates all the way back to the year 1900, and it takes place on a remote island in the Outer Hebrides, which, for those of you who are not from the UK, is just off the coast of Scotland. On this very remote island, 3 lighthouse keepers lived and worked together, tending to the light and ensuring safe passage for the ships that went past the island. These men were hardened, experienced lighthouse keepers. They were used to being around the sea, they were good at their jobs, and one in particular was known by locals on the mainland to be a bit of a brawler. These are tough guys, is what I'm saying, and that's something worth remembering as this story progresses. On December the 26th, a supply ship arrived on the island, only to find that there was nobody to welcome them, nobody to help them take the supplies off the ship. Not only that, but the lighthouse was deserted. In fact, the whole island was deserted. Now, nobody lived on this island besides the lighthouse keepers, but there was no trace of them. The door to the lighthouse was unlocked, and on entering, the kitchen was in disarray with chairs knocked down and a half-eaten meal on the kitchen table. 2 of the waterproof coats that the lighthouse keepers would wear if they had to venture outside in bad weather were gone, but one was still hanging up. On further inspection, the crew of the supply ship found a diary dated December the 12th. It described a storm so awful it reduced one of the lighthouse keepers to tears. This was the lighthouse keeper who was known for being a real tough guy, and yet the diary referred to him as crying continuously whilst the storm raged. One of the other lighthouse keepers was apparently rendered mute with terror. The diary describes the 3 lighthouse keepers sitting huddled together in fear as the storm went on outside. On first reading the diary, it was assumed that all 3 lighthouse keepers must have been swept out to sea and drowned. But there were some things that nobody could understand. For a start, if the storm was so bad, why did all 3 of them apparently go outside, but only 2 of them bother to put coats on? And also, why would all 3 of them abandon their post at the lighthouse at the same time when they had rules forbidding them from doing that? One person at least had to be watching that light at all times, and yet all 3 lighthouse keepers had vanished. And why would 3 very experienced lighthouse keepers be that terrified of a storm and not know what to do? On closer inspection, the diary did not end on December the 12th. In fact, on December the 13th, there was another entry saying that the storm, this horrific, awful storm, was still raging so badly that the 3 of them had begun to pray to God for it to end. On December the 15th, a final diary entry was made. It said simply, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." The thing is, there was no storm. The weather had been calm on the nights of December the 12th, 13th and 14th. The sea was smooth. In fact, people on the nearby island of Lewis said that they could see the lighthouse for every single night from the 12th, 13th and 14th, and if there had been really high waves as you'd expect in a terrible storm, they wouldn't have been able to have seen the lighthouse. A storm did eventually batter the island, but not until December the 17th, days after the diary entries were made. And again, these were seasoned, experienced lighthouse keepers. They wouldn't have gotten the dates wrong as they wrote in their diary. So what happened to these three men? Nobody knows. In 1946, having previously had sons, Florence and John Pollock welcomed a baby girl who they named Joanna. 5 years later, in 1951, they had a second daughter who they named Jacqueline. The Pollock sisters were incredibly close. They did absolutely everything together, and Joanna really mothered Jacqueline. She took care of her, spent lots of time with her. Despite the 5-year age gap, they were super duper tight. And despite the fact that Joanna had a rather eerie prediction, she would tell people, "I'm never going to grow up to be a lady. I'm always just going to be a child." She had a very happy childhood, as did Jacqueline. Tragically, that happiness was cut short on May the 7th, 1957, when the girls were walking to church with their friend Anthony. A woman who had recently lost her children in a bitter custody battle was attempting to take her own life. She had taken drugs and gotten behind the wheel of her car, and she drove at excessive speed and purposefully ploughed into all three children. Joanna and Jacqueline were killed instantly, and Anthony received fatal injuries and died en route to hospital. Florence, the girl's mother, fell into a deep depression. Their father John was devastated too, but he had a very strong spiritual belief that the girls were going to be brought back to the family via reincarnation. He believed he could feel the girls' spirits in their bedroom. Whenever he went up there, he would say, "They're still here, they're trying to come back to us." Florence was a devout Catholic, as was John, and she was very anti this idea. In fact, John's insistence that somehow the girls would be brought back to them via reincarnation angered Florence, the devout Catholic, so much that their marriage was put on the line and they came very close to separating. They worked through it, however, and in early 1958, Florence became pregnant again. Now, despite the fact that doctors told her she was only carrying one baby, and the fact that twins did not run in either John or Florence's family, John was convinced that Florence was carrying twin girls, the reincarnation of Joanna and Jacqueline. Florence was very anti this and made sure she said so. The doctors kept telling John, "No, there's no twins in your family, and she's definitely only carrying one baby." But in October of 1958, Florence gave birth to twin girls named Jennifer and Gillian. John took this as absolute proof that Joanna and Jacqueline had been brought back to the family via reincarnation. The babies even had the same exact birthmarks as Joanna and Jacqueline had had. As the twins grew, even Florence began to suspect that her husband might be right. Once the twins were old enough to talk, they started asking for toys that they'd never seen before, toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline and which Florence and John had put away out of sight after the girls had been killed. Not only did they describe the toys exactly, but when their parents took them out of storage and gave them to them, the twins gave them the exact same names that Joanna and Jacqueline had named them, and played with them in the exact same way that the girls had. Not only this, but despite the fact that the family had moved to a new town when the twins were just 3 months old, once the girls were old enough to talk, they would describe that hometown in accurate detail. They would talk about their bedroom at the old house, despite having moved away far too young to have any memory of where things were in that room. They could even describe the playground that they used to love playing at, despite the fact that they had never ever been there. But Joanna and Jacqueline used to spend a lot of time on the playground, and the twins could talk about what their favourite things were. They could also describe the girls' school and what their classrooms looked like, despite having never stepped foot in the building. When the family moved back to that original hometown, the twins were able to direct everybody to that playground, despite never having been there. The conversations the twins had with each other were also very strange. For example, Florence once overheard Gillian telling Jennifer that the scar on her forehead came from that accident she had when she fell onto a bucket. In reality, Jennifer had been born with a scar on her forehead, but Jacqueline had a scar on her forehead from when she had fallen onto a bucket. But the strangest thing of all was the fact that both twins were incredibly scared of cars. Florence even overheard them talking about car accidents, even in one case overhearing them talking about how a car had hit them both and killed them. Florence and John had made an agreement not to tell the twins what happened to their older sisters until they were old enough to fully understand it, so they weren't sure how on earth they could give such details. Although some cynics believed that the girls' older brothers simply had to be feeding them this information somehow, without their parents knowing, there were other psychologists who took it very seriously. In fact, Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychologist who had studied thousands of supposed reincarnations, published a book of 14 cases that he actually believed were true, one of which was the Pollock sisters. By the age of 5, Gillian and Jennifer's memories of their past lives seemed to start to fade, and they went on to lead completely normal lives. Were they the reincarnations of their sisters? You decide. And now here comes the point where I tell my story. Now I realise that it's not quite as dramatic as the first two, but it is a mystery and it's one that has never been solved. When I was about 11, I got a silver filigree ring. I was obsessed with this ring. I never took it off other than to poke cocktail sticks through the holes to clean it. Because believe me, filigree is beautiful, but it picks up dirt. I wore it on this finger where I now have a different silver ring, and like I said, I never took it off other than to clean it. I loved that ring. When I was 12, my nan was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and we went up to London to stay with my grandfather while she was dying in the hospital. In the weeks leading up to this, I had started to notice that this ring was getting a little bit too tight for my finger, and as a result, I started taking it off before bed. One night when I was staying with my grandfather, I took my ring off before bed and placed it on my bedside table. When I woke up in the morning, it was gone. Now that day, I searched everywhere for that ring. I knew I'd taken it off before bed because, like I said, it was getting too tight for my finger and I therefore didn't sleep in it anymore. And it wasn't on the floor under the bed, it wasn't behind the bedside table, it hadn't slipped down anywhere. I checked all over the room and it wasn't there. When I couldn't find it in the room, I checked the rest of the house and it was nowhere to be seen. Obviously, there were bigger things going on at that time, and so I eventually went home without the ring. A couple of weeks later, we went back to London for my nan's funeral, and I was staying in the same room with my sister in my granddad's house, and again, I decided I'd have a look around for the ring in case my grandfather had found it in the intervening weeks and popped it in a drawer or something, but there was absolutely no sign of it. I even asked him while I was there, did you ever happen to find that ring? And he said he hadn't seen it anywhere. I asked my aunt and my uncle whether they had seen it when they'd been round to the house, but understandably they had bigger things on their minds, and no, they absolutely had not seen my ring anywhere. One day whilst I was there, however, I had a really strong urge to go into the front room. Now my nan was of a certain generation, and some people watching this video are going to recognise this, where there is a room in the house which is only for best. For my nan, the front room was that room. We would go in there on Christmas morning and exchange presents, and we would go in there sometimes if there were lots of us because there were more seats in there. But most of the time, the door was closed. That was the best room. We went in the lounge. We didn't go in the front room. It's just how people were back then. I had a really strong urge to go into this front room, so I did. But the last time I had been in there was the morning of my nan's funeral, because my nan had been brought back to the house the night before the funeral, and the family had been sitting around her because she was in the front room. I had gone in to see her that morning before the funeral, and that had been the last time I'd been in that front room. Now, like I said, this was my nan's best room. Because of that, none of the knickknacks in that room were really out to be touched. There were cabinets in that room. Those cabinets were locked. Only my nan and granddad had a key to them. Anyway, something made me go up to those cabinets. There was one that had lots of family photos. Pictures of my nan when she was young, pictures of me when I was young, pictures of my cousins, pictures of my dad, etc, etc. And I was looking at the photos when something caught my eye. In the next cabinet along, behind all of the knickknacks, I could see a tiny little glint of silver. I knew instantly what it was, and I ran to get my granddad, and I asked him if he would open that cabinet. He had to go and find the key, and he was like, why on earth do you want to go in that cabinet? What do you need from the cabinet? But he did get the key and he did unlock it, and there at the back of the cabinet, behind the knickknacks, was my silver filigree ring. My granddad swears he did not put it in that cabinet. He never found it. He had looked for it for me, but he never found it. None of my aunts or uncles lived in the house, and they certainly, like I said, had other things on their mind and weren't looking for a silver filigree ring. And if they'd found it, they would have passed it to my granddad rather than asking for the key and putting it in a locked cabinet. So how did it get there? But there was one other strange thing. You might remember me saying that the ring had become too tight for my finger, so I had started taking it off before bed. When I took it out of the cupboard, it had a perfect split through the silver metal, right through the back. That little split had created a gap that meant I could bend it slightly and make it fit my finger again. How did it get a split in the back? It was a solid silver ring. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of you who are thinking, yeah, there's definitely a logical explanation for that. Please don't tell us your dead grandmother put it in the cupboard for you. But I don't know what that logical explanation is, because no member of my family has ever said, oh yeah, I found it and I asked for the key and I put it in that cabinet and I also sawed the back. You might be thinking, where is it now? I'd love to know the answer to that, because I don't know. I wore it, obviously, very obsessively after that, because it felt incredibly special. It felt like it had a very strong connection to my nan, and I absolutely did not want to take it off ever. However, eventually I did lose it. And this time I never found it again. I would love to find it. I would love to still think it's somewhere around, but we have moved house at least twice since then, so I'm unlikely to find it now. So that's my weird mystery of the silver filigree ring, and those other two mysteries were two of my favourites that I have read recently online. Do you have a favourite mystery that you can't solve? Has something happened to you that you can't explain? Let me know in the comments. It's Halloween. I want to read all the spooky, creepy stuff. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. You can click on my floaty head if you'd like to subscribe, and last week's video is over there. I'm gonna go and read some more spooky stories, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.